Kind of a strange one this time. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. Not called Blade Runner. It is the story which the Blade Runner movie is based off of. However, the title Blade Runner, I don't like them sticking it on this book. They did so. I think this just was published when the second Blade Runner film came out. But it was. The term Blade Runner is the title of a totally different science fiction novel that has nothing to do with Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. But anyways, the film version of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is called Blade Runner. And while I'll try not to be comparing the two, I can't help but compare the two because I've seen Blade Runner the film a lot and I really like the film, both films. So I'm going to try not to compare them, but I am going to compare them and assume that you've seen this film. So it is the plot of Blade Runner, but different. It's very strange because it sort of answers some of the questions. Not even questions, it just answers some of this sort of questions I didn't realize I had about the Blade Runner film. Like the thing about animals and the sort of the fake owl. And especially in 2049, the Blade Runner 2049 film, I think there's a lot of animals. And the questions during the Voight-Kampff test, in the film, they seem not bizarre, because I guess it is explained that they are questions proposed to invoke empathy, and if they fail, then obviously the person they're interviewing is an android, a replicant, not a replicant. Okay, let's just start over. So, we're talking about Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. In this world, this is set in 2021, I believe, which is weird. It was written in 1968, or published in 1968. So it's weird to read a book that's like roughly the time period. It's set in roughly the time period that I'm reading it. And like, there's stuff like, there's flying cars, and there is colonies on Mars and various planets. And I think there even is a sort of a big ship going extrasolar off into the unknown. And the Soviet Union is still a thing, which I find fascinating that someone in 1968 just assumes that, oh yes, in 2020, the Soviet Union will continue to exist. And of course, it hasn't existed for the past 30 years. So I wonder how many political organizations and entities that exist now that we think, oh yeah, in 30, 50 years from now, of course they'll still be around. And they just totally won't. And everyone 50 years from now will be like, well, of course they don't exist. Anyways, but that's beside the point. So there are, in this world, to facilitate colonization of different worlds and planets, they have created artificial beings that are in the form of humanity, but are not human. These are called androids, so they are human robots. And these robots are being updated and upgraded, and every year the technology is increasing, and they're coming out with new and new models. In this book, the Nexus 6 is the most recent model, and they're almost indistinguishable from humans. And that is what this test, I forget the name of it now. I literally said it a few minutes ago. This tests for empathy, because that's one thing that androids do not have, is empathy. And they call these robots Andes for short, androids. In this world, it is a post-World War terminus world. So instead of World War III, they call it World War terminus, from the Latin for end. So those sort of, or final, I should say, the final war. So in this world, it's extremely radioactive, so it was a nuclear world. There's a lot of radioactive dust and ash throughout the world, and so most people have emigrated off-world. The infrastructure still remains for the intense intensely dense population. However, the population that remains cannot has way more infrastructure than they need. Like, for example, a massive apartment complex with thousands of apartments will have one or two people living in it. So people are very spread out, but have still sort of congregated to these megalopolises, such as in this book, San Francisco, and Seattle also features in this book. I think in the movie it is Los Angeles, but anyways. So we follow this guy, this bounty hunter, who he's not a police officer, or is he? I think he works for the police department, but he's a bounty hunter. And it's his job to retire androids, which is their terminology for killing them. So for whatever reason, sometimes androids, which only exist off-world, wait, that might not be true. Anyways, androids off-world kill their masters because they're essentially slave labor, and then hijack ships and come back to Earth because they sort of have this longing for Earth that's not really explained, like a sort of a nostalgia for something. For example, the androids talk about the value of pre-war literature and pre-war fiction, especially science fiction, the value of that on the outer worlds. So they must have some sort of nostalgia for Earth. Anyways, so the story goes that there's this bounty hunter, Rick Deckard. He has a wife named Iran, which I think is really weird. Like, just a weird name, but maybe that's just me. He is sort of the second best bounty hunter in San Francisco. There's this other guy, Dave Holden, I think his name is, who the story starts with him getting injured and wounded, almost killed by one of these androids. And so the police chief, Harry Bryant, calls in Deckard and says, we need you to go deal with these guys. But first, I want you to go to the Rosen Corporation, not the Tyrell Corporation. In the film, it's Tyrell, but it's the Rosen Corporation, and run the Voight-Kampff test. That's what it's called. This empathy test on a series of both humans and androids, and these new androids, to see if the test still works for the latest models. And so he goes, and he meets Rachel Rosen, this sort of young woman. Who is a scion of the Rosen family, and there's also an older man, her uncle Eldon Rosen, and Eldon asks Deckard to perform the test on Rachel, find out if she's an android, and this is the test that we see in the book, and it's all questions relating to the mistreatment or the death or killing of animals. And if it's a human, they are empathetic and sort of horrified at this happening to animals. But if it's a android, they don't really care. And so, anyways, he determines that Rachel is in fact an android, and Rachel didn't even know this. But now that she does know, whatever, it doesn't seem like a big deal. So in this world, animals are sacred. They have this form of religion called Mercerism, where they have this device where they take hold of these two bars and then a vid screen, and it sort of creates a virtual reality where they see themselves as this man Mercer slowly walking up this hill, sort of Sisyphean, like he's walking up the hill, but he's also being stoned from time to time. These, like, the enemy, they call them killers, are throwing stones at him, and when you get struck by one of the stones in this VR, it actually somehow manifests in the real life, which is very strange. And in this process, everyone who's currently using this machine at the same time, their emotions are being shared. So it's sort of a collective emotion. It's like a hive mind of emotion. Anyways, so Mercerism, there's this guy Mercer, and he sort of values the life of animals very highly. And in this sort of post-war world, animals are very scarce, and so maybe this religion was created in order to protect animal life, um, so that humans have a strong desire to own an animal, a pet. It could be even exotic pets, like it could be an insect, it could be a rodent, it could be an ostrich, it could be a traditional pet, a farm animal, whatever it is. There's a huge social more that you should own an animal and look after an animal. Um, and so Deckard, with his wife, they had a sheep that he had inherited from his father-in-law, I believe, but it had died, and so he got an electric sheep. So a fake. There are fake animals for those who are too poor to afford an animal, but who still want to, for the social reasons, have an animal to look after. So he has this electric sheep, but he really desires another animal. And since he works sort of on commission, whereas he gets $1,000 for each android he kills, which apparently is a lot of money in 2020. If he can retire a whole bunch of these Andes, he'll have enough money to buy an animal. Yeah, the mercerism thing is very strange through this book. It's totally absent in the film. But anyways, so he, after interviewing Rachel and determining that the test works and she is an android, he then goes back to San Francisco. He gets a call that there is a Russian police officer who wants to sort of work with him. And he's like, oh, I work alone, but okay, fine. So this guy comes into his car and they start speaking for a bit. And this is the point when the writing sort of, I find the writing in this book very clunky. It feels like it's not polished. It, like I consider myself, like I have pretty good reading comprehension, but I had to read over this segment many times to make sure I got it. And there were other times like that as well, where it's not clear to the reader what exactly is happening. And I don't know if that's purposeful. It doesn't really feel purposeful. Anyways, so when this officer's in with him, I can't remember the name of the android, but he's looking for this android. And the officer, Polakov's the name of the android, I think. I can't remember the name of the officer. But he says to the officer, you're not Polakov, you're the name of the officer, just out of the blue. And then the officer says, don't you mean that the other way around? Like, shouldn't you be saying that I'm not this officer, I actually am the android? And so that was sort of a logical trick that Deckard just sort of pulled out of nowhere. I don't know why he suspected this guy at all. He's just talking with this guy and then suddenly pulls that out and determines that this guy is actually the android, the one who had attacked Holden. I think his name was Holden, Dave Holden, the previous bounty hunter. And so it's very strange. Many times during this, when it's revealed that one character is an android or one character is not, you think it would suddenly break out into like a big action scene with gunfights, but they sort of like talk about it for a bit. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to get my gun out, and why is my gun not working? Ah, your gun's not working because I have initiated a safety field which disperses laser beams, and so your gun cannot work. Oh, shoot, but my gun works. Boom, and then he shoots him. It's very strange. This is one of the examples where if the movie didn't exist, I don't think I would have liked this book. It has really great themes and ideas, but the execution, I think, is poorly done. But I really like the movie, so for that reason, seeing it in its sort of raw, original form is really cool. So anyway, so he kills this guy, and then he's like, okay, the next person on my list is this opera singer that we think is one of these androids. So he goes to the opera singer, and she starts he's questioning whether she's an android, and she sort of turns it back on him, like, well, what if you're the android? And calls the cops on him, and these cops come down and sort of arrest him. They're like, Rick Deckard, bounty hunter, we've never heard of you, you're coming with us. And it's at this moment that I'm like, oh, here we go. This is about halfway through the book when I'm like, oh, okay, now we're getting interesting. Maybe he is an android, and like he had false memories implanted in him, and sort of he thinks he's this bounty hunter, but he's actually like just this like serial killer android. Because he gets taken by these cops to a police station, and he's like, isn't the police station like on this other street, and they're like, what? Nobody's used that one for years. That's the old precinct. He's like, we gotta go to the new one. So I'm thinking he has memories from like 50 years previously of this Richard Deckard character. So I was really convinced, and he like because he could sit down in this other precinct, and these cops have never heard of him. He's never heard of any of them. He says, call Bryant, like my commanding officer. They try and call him, they can't get a hold of anyone, or anyone. They say they've never heard of this Bryant guy. So he's like, well, I get my one phone call, I'm gonna call my wife. He phones his wife's number, and some other woman appears, so he hangs up immediately. And it really feels like, oh, the twist is like he has memories from this person from decades ago, and he's really an android. um, if I use the word replicant, it's because in Blade Runner, the film, they're called replicants. I might slip up, but they're called androids in this book. And so, where are we at? Yeah, so he's in this really strange situation where they call in, sort of, he's sitting down with the head cop, and the head cop calls in their bounty hunter to run a test on him. Um, and then there's this weird confrontation where everyone's sort of questioning who is a bounty hunter, and like the bounty hunter they call in says that, or sorry, questioning who is an android. The bounty hunter they call in says, "Oh, I always thought it would be a great idea for bounty hunters to be androids. Like, wouldn't that be great?" And he says, "I think everyone should be tested whether they're an android, because who knows? Like, even my commanding officer here, he could be an android." And he's like, "I'll go get my testing stuff." And that's when the commanding officer's like, "Yeah, it's true. I'm actually an android, and the bounty hunter is also an android. This whole building's full of androids. Um, we brought you here because the opera singer is an android, and she called us in. We're trying to look after her. Um, but I have to kill you now." But then he chooses not to kill him for some reason. And then when the android bounty hunter comes in, he ends up shooting his superior officer because his superior officer was going to shoot him, and it's all very confusing. But eventually this bounty hunter, who is an android, teams up with Deckard, and then they go back after the opera singer. They capture the opera singer. She's in an art gallery looking at art pieces, and there is some question about like what it means to be human and what it means to be an android. But in the end, the android bounty hunter shoots, his name's Phil Resch, I think, shoots and kills or retires Luba Luft, the opera singer android. And then he's really questioning, am I an android? Am I not? You have to test me. And he tests him, and turns out he is, but Deckard doesn't tell him that he is. And they're very oddly calm about it. Like, Deckard's like, yes, well, if you're an android, I'll have to kill you. And the guy's like, oh, okay, yeah, you'll have to kill me. Yes, if I am an android, because it is illegal for me. Like, they don't value their lives. Maybe it's just an android thing, but it feels like everyone in this book, they, instead of panicking, reaching for their guns and fighting for their lives, they sort of sit and talk about it and just sort of accept it, which is very strange. But anyway, so eventually Deckard just kills this guy, Phil Resch, and Deckard's realizing that he's starting to empathize with the androids, but it's only with women androids. And one of the things Phil says is, "You're doing it wrong. You're killing these androids, and then feeling remorseful because you have feelings for them." He's like, "You have to sleep with them first, then kill them." Which, I don't know. This book was written in 1968, so who knows? So he's thinking about that. And that's when he finds out the final three are locked up in this apartment with this one guy who I haven't talked about, J.R. Isidore, who I think there's a character in the movie called J.R. as well, but they're different characters. So this guy is what they call a chicken head. So there are chicken heads and ant heads. Basically, the radiation on Earth affects people, and some people have much lower intelligence because of it, and they're termed specials. Sort of slang is chicken head for someone with a below average intelligence due to this radiation, and these people aren't allowed to emigrate. They're sort of lower class citizens. Anyway, so these androids have made it to JR's apartment. Pris is one of them. She's the first one, and she sort of mocks him and takes advantage of him, in weird ways, and he just sort of goes along with it because he's just happy to sort of have people that want and care for him. And like he finds a spider, which like animal life is sacred. So like a wild spider is just amazing to him. So he captures it and he brings it to them and he's really excited. Like, look, I found the spider. And they're like, oh, it's got 8 legs. How strange. I wonder why it needs 8 legs. I wonder if it would still function with 4 legs. And so these androids start cutting its legs off, which is really horrible. And of course, JR is just like revolted by this. And eventually he takes the spider and drowns it to stop them from harming it. So there's this weird subplot with this character Buster Friendly, who's on the TV 24/7, doing like talk shows 24/7 with these characters that are always on. These characters who haven't really done anything in life but are still celebrities, which is kind of familiar. But it turns out that he's an android, and his whole thing is refuting Mercerism. And so he has this big announcement he's been leading up to throughout the whole book. And at the end of the book, all these androids are set around with JR, and Buster reveals that Mercerism is false, and he has all this reasoning why, and it doesn't really matter. And JR doesn't really believe it, but he's still in shock about the spider, and it's all very confusing. Anyway, so Deckard is sort of having this weird crisis where he's realizes he's empathizing with these female androids, and so he calls up Rachel, who had tried to contact him previously and offered to help him tracking down these androids. He had dismissed her, but now he calls her up and he's like, I need you to come here, I need your help. So she's like, fine. So she goes to the hotel room and they like sleep together, which is apparently illegal, but he does it. And then they have this weird conversation. They've made like a deal where, because Pris is the same model as Rachel, they look identical. Deckard thinks he won't be able to kill Pris, so he makes a deal that Rachel will kill Pris and he'll kill the other two, Roy Batty and his wife Ingram Batty. Anyways, so they get, after the hotel room, they get in the car and they're flying to the apartment, and then Deckard makes this weird decision that he's going to kill Rachel for some reason. So he sets the car down, he pulls out the gun. She's like, okay, make sure it's painless, shoot me here at like the base of her neck or wherever. And he decides he can't do it. So he sort of kicks her out of her car, or he takes her back to her car, and she goes back to Seattle, ostensibly. And he continues on. He gets to the apartment, he sees JR outside it so JR goes through this weird thing where he is having sort of the Mercer vision, and it turns out he's in that pod thing, so he's experiencing the vision, but then he somehow gets an actual spider given to him by Mercer. Mercer gives him a spider to make up for the one that was killed and tortured. So JR's taking the spider outside, which how Mercer, who is not real but like manifested real and created the spider. Anyways, JR's letting the spider go. Deckard goes into the building, pretends to be JR to be let in. I guess before he gets to the apartment, he comes across Mercer, this physical manifestation of Mercer, who says, hey, the one that's the most difficult to kill is actually behind you. Watch out, turn around. So he turns around and sees Pris coming towards him. At first he thinks it's Rachel, because it looks exactly like Rachel, but the clothes are different. And so he shoots her, and he does manage to kill her. And he didn't think he would, but he did. So then he goes to the apartment, he pretends to be JR, and they let him in. And he quickly kills Ingram, and I'm expecting this epic fight with Roy Batty like there is in the film, but he just ends up shooting Roy Batty and killing him really quickly too. So I did forget to mention, before he killed these three, the first three he killed, he got $3,000. So he went to a place and he bought a goat, which is like, apparently like goats like pretty upscale. The $3,000 was just a down payment on this goat. So he had this goat, and he sort of felt like this profound relief, like I finally own a living animal again. This is great. My wife's gonna love it. He shows his wife, she does love it. She's really happy. They're happy. But that's when he gets the call from his boss, like, you gotta kill these other three. Like, get out there. And he's like, I'm tired, boss. He's like, too bad, do it. So that's when he went out. So he's killed these other three now. So he calls up his boss, And he's like, I killed the other three. Great. He goes back to his house and his wife's there. He's like, yeah, the goat's dead. And he's sort of not surprised. He's like, oh, well, if it died of disease or whatever, like, we just bought it. There's insurance or something. We can get another one. She's like, no, someone came. It was this like this girl came and grabbed it and threw it off the roof. And it turns out it was Rachel. Why she did that, I don't know. I mean, there's probably a reason, like her sort of jealousy or her. I think she did say that. He says, you love the goat, then your wife, then me, or your wife, your goat, then me, whatever the order was. So anyway, she killed this goat. So he's like super depressed at this point. He's exhausted. So he gets in his car and he just flies north. He goes to the sort of this uninhabited region in Oregon where it's just a wasteland. He lands his car, he gets out, it's like a desert. He starts climbing up this hill and this rock comes out of nowhere and hits him in the head. And it's sort of identical to that weird VR thing where you take the place of Mercer walking up this hill as people throw rocks at you. What that's all about, I don't know. So he goes back down to his car and he's talking about how he's fused with Mercer and he'll never be able to kill androids again. And then he sees this toad hopping on the road, and he's like blown away because the toad is like one of the most sacred creatures to Mercer, and in fact toads are extinct. So he collects the toad and he's like, wow, finding an extinct animal, especially a toad, he's like, it must be a sign. Like, you get a commendation from the UN, you get $1 million stipend, like you get so much for finding an extinct animal. Like, this is life's turning around. He's got this like just radiating joy. He captures the toad, he takes it back to his wife. His wife's never seen him this happy. He looks like a whole new person. And she looks at the toad, she's like, wow, this is really cool. And then she notices a control panel on it, and it turns out it's an electric toad. It's not real. And then he's sort of like, oh, okay. He's very crestfallen. And then he goes to bed and he falls asleep. And that's kind of just how it ends. No big twist. Yeah, it ends with the wife calling up the sort of fake animal hospital that looks after electric animals and orders all the stuff they need to look after the toad. She says, my husband's very devoted to it. So it's a very interesting book. I think the movie is so much better. The movie took the idea and ran with it and took the sort of the raw lump of, like, there's a lot of good stuff in here. I just don't think it's executed as well. Maybe that's just because I've seen the movie and I'm tainted. But yeah, it's weird, and it's like I said, it feels clunky. The writing, it kind of, maybe I haven't read any other Dick. Maybe it's that sci-fi in the late 60s. Maybe I should try and think of what else I've read that's sort of in that time period. There is something, I can't think of what it is, but something, it does remind me of the writing style of something else I have read. Yeah, weird, but good. I don't like that they call it Blade Runner. It's not Blade Runner. Yeah, so that's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Never once was it talked about whether the androids dream, but that's not the point. There was an electric sheep, however. Yeah, even the picture on this cover is just like, that's Harrison Ford from Blade Runner. That's another difference. The book, like I said, is very depopulated, the city, whereas in the movie it seems very overpopulated. Also, the book has a lot of sort of East Asian influence in culture and stuff, which becomes associated with the sort of cyberpunk genre, but that's not apparent in this at all. It is just a white American people, as far as I know. Anyways, so that was that.